Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Adrian, and I have here with me Andy.
Hello.
Andy is, I don't know how to call it. Is he just a conference organizer? No, he's not. Is he just a CTO? No, he's not. Is he just a conference benefactor because he sponsored Friendly last year? No, he's not. He does so many good things. And we will find out more about them today. So, hey Andy, how's it going? Welcome.
It's going well. The sun has finally come out in the UK after weeks of freezing weather. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So you're approaching that one day of spring, two
Yes,
days of spring.
1 day of spring, 3 days of summer, back to the autumn. That's pretty much where we're at.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, we're gonna talk about Brighton and the beautiful city of Brighton a
hmm
little bit later. But first, I would like for our guests to know more about you. Like, who are you? Where do you work? And how did you end up hosting such a beautiful conference in Brighton?
So I picked up Rails about some number of years ago, 2006 maybe,
Okay.
and I worked in a couple of startups. So I was living in Singapore at the time, and so when I moved back to the UK, I was looking for work as a startup I was running was folding in on itself, and I didn't know anyone in the UK. So I'd started my Rails career in Southeast Asia, so I didn't know anyone. I'd run a conference there as well by accident, and I decided that the best way to do it with 18-month-old twins was to have a conference in my hometown because there wasn't one in the UK at the time. So I volunteered myself and did that. So that's how it broadly came about. What I do now is I've been at my current company, CoverageBook, for 5 years employed and a couple of years on and off before that as a contractor.
Okay.
We're a SaaS business for the PR industry. We got like 3,000-ish customers,
Okay.
12 people in the team, 12, 13 people in the team. And of those, 6 or 7 would probably call themselves developers.
Okay.
So it's a relatively small team. We like to think we sort of bat above our weight. We're very much in that small company Rails wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And
That's
I have a problem with overcommitment. So that's why I'm up to, this will be my 10th edition of Brighton Ruby coming up this summer. So yeah,
that's
it
cool.
yeah, it's been like I just get back on the horse every year. Like there was an obvious stopping moment after COVID. Like COVID
Yeah.
was, I was
Yeah.
fortunate in that I had the support of a couple of my sponsors who said, take the money that we've given you for the in-person event and just turn it into something else. And so I did that year. And
Oh, nice.
that's when I printed all those wise poignant guides, the physical
Nice.
copies. And yeah, I just got back on the horse in 2022 and we're 3 events post-pandemic. Yeah,
Yes.
so it's a weird work adjacent side hobby. Like I enjoy, I enjoy the people side of this job. Like, I know we're all meant to be introverts, and I am as well. But like,
Yeah.
my particular introversion energy involves a few times a year getting together in a big crowd and seeing folks who truly understand what we do and what I do, and just catching up with people. So yeah, that it's a big part of my year is the sort of the conference going, speaking, and running. So.
Nice. Nice. Beautiful. Yeah. So much to unpack. Yeah. I've been to my first Brighton was last year, and I
Mhm.
just loved it. Coincidentally, last year was the year where I started hosting Friendly RB, and because I did that, I wanted to go and do some research. I went
Mhm.
to many. I think there were like 6 Ruby conferences in Europe. So, but I truly enjoyed Brighton, and I definitely learned a few things from somebody.
I'm interested. What did you learn?
Dude, I mean, one of the things that I loved the most about Brighton is that it didn't felt like a conference. It felt like a show. You would go to a show. You get invited into that beautiful venue, in the room, and then you're gonna have like 3 or 4 people come and speak about things. Sometimes it's Ruby related, sometimes it's not, And I think that's just beautiful. And I took that and I used that the same thing, because I personally, I don't like when I'm going to a conference, it's like Ruby, 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 or tech, 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 whatever. Your mind is going to be, all over the place. So I love that it was kind of a show. It was curated. It was beautifully curated. There were plenty of, things that I enjoyed, like the documentation talk and other talks. And I just like the whole agenda of the thing.
Yeah, and part of that is I've been doing this long enough that I also spend a lot of time with my speakers beforehand. Like I put a lot of effort into their talks. So, for example, the documentation talk, I've seen that about 7 times.
Yeah.
So like I work with Caitlin really hard on like polishing it so that she you wouldn't know it from the stage and from her persona. She was super nervous about that talk.
Okay.
But it was one of the best reviewed talks of the day. Like in the questionnaire I put out afterwards, people loved that talk because it really, it's one of those guilty secrets we all have. It's like we're all rubbish at documentation and we all wish we were better.
Of course.
So like it's being able to put in the effort to help speakers create something. I mean, it's like you say, like it can't all be hard tech and it can't all be heavy and it can't all be advanced. Like there has to be a balance, and particularly in a single track event, like you have to mix it up.
Yeah.
And so I do think a lot about that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So regarding like the single track aspect, this is something that I spoke with a few people. Like most conferences, I think this year, the ones that I went to, they were like 2 days. They were single track, but 2 days. And Brighton is just 1 day. And I told everybody like, hey, I felt this pressure to go to speak with as many people as possible because tomorrow they might not be around, right? That didn't happen. We had plenty of, we put up a good crowd that we stayed the next day and we had fun. But I felt that pressure. I want to meet everybody. I don't know who's going to be here tomorrow. Well, when you have 2 days, you're going to have the social between the days, going to a pub or whatever. You're going to become friends, and the next day it's, oh, hey man, hey, how are you? We like, it's like you knew each other from forever. So that's my only
I can't quite swing 2 days on an event that I mostly organize by myself. So I quite like the one and done. Like it forces me to really think about the day.
I agree.
And financially it's less scary too.
I can imagine. With Friendly, like after I did Friendly, like I can relate to that. Yes, one and done, that would be just perfect. It's like, you build something and you give no support, but if you have the next day, you're gonna have to do everything.
Selling something once is the big thing in the Rails community now, right? So
yes.
So let's do that.
Brighton it could be like the original once conference for Ruby.
Yeah, if I hadn't done it 10 times, I'd totally agree.
That's cool. That's cool. So it was lovely. Brighton is lovely as well. Whenever I spoke with somebody like before going to the conference and telling them like, hey, I'm going to go to Brighton, like whatever for this conference, said, oh, Brighton, oh, that's beautiful. You're going to love it. And I really did. And I hope everybody, tries it this year. So
it really is. I benefit from being a really interesting city, and I also benefit. I'm like an hour from London, so like all the London folks can come down. So I've got my thumb on the scales just based on where I live, and we're only half an hour from Gatwick as well. So like if you're coming in from Europe, it's actually quite straightforward as well. So
I spoke with many people that came by train, so that's also an option. That's perfect. And Alessandro Rodi from Renault said he came to Brighton. He spent 2 days at the conference, and then he spent, I think, another 2 days in London with the family. But he told us, like, I told my wife, like, you're not going to see me for the first 2 days. I'm going to be with everybody, so you're not going to see me. You can do whatever you want, right? So that's another thing that you could do. And now recently what's the thing with Ruby Central? Tell us. I don't want to, hush posh it and whatever. I don't want to misrepresent it. What's your thing? Because I know you organized the RubyConf mini.
So this is 18 months ago, Gemma and Emily asked for my help to organize RubyConf Mini when RubyConf was in Texas, and a bunch of folks didn't feel like supporting Texas with their money felt for them individually like a good thing for them to do, given some political developments over there, which some people may have an argument with, but I could see, and I heard from enough folks that they were looking for a way to celebrate that RubyConf kind of thing, but somewhere else. So we put on a relatively small 3-day event in Providence, Rhode Island. So it had a little bit of Brighton and it had a little bit of the RubyConf vibe.
Yeah.
So it felt like a RubyConf, but it just felt smaller. Like, so it was only 180 odd people or something like that. So it was like a third the size of regular RubyConf. But that was a good experience. Ruby Central sort of gave us financial cover to do that. So that was sort of an officially sanctioned RubyConf event, satellite, I suppose.
Okay.
And this year I've been asked to co-chair RailsConf. Now, normally that's a member of the Ruby Central board, and I'm not on the Ruby Central board. I have a Ruby Central email address as of about 7 days ago, but I have no official capacity on the board of Ruby Central. I'm just some guy who likes to put people in rooms. But so I got a message from Ufuk, who is the lead of the Shopify Ruby infrastructure team, who is on the board of Ruby Central, has recently joined there. And he was like, so I was meant to be doing it with another member of the board, but they're really, really busy. Can you do it? And I then went and had a difficult conversation with my other half and said, so you know how I was going to take it easy this year? I'm not. So on Monday I'm off to see the venue in Detroit.
Okay.
And yeah, so he and I are we've put together a program committee that's people are just agreeing to join us. The CFP is open. We're looking for talks. And yeah, we're just going to take RailsConf and hopefully give it a little bit of our take on what RailsConf should be.
Okay.
And things that we've enjoyed about previous events and things that we think could be better, things that we've heard from the community about. It's a long running event. Like, it's been going like nearly 2 decades, nearly as long as Rails has. There's been an international, US based Rails conference. Whether it's been run by the current Ruby Central organization or not has changed over time. I think in the early days when it was when Rails hit the scene in like 2005-6, it was like a big 3,000 person O'Reilly monster. And it's not that anymore, thank God. But it is, it's 1,000 people. It's multiple tracks. It's multiple days. It's a significant undertaking. It's like a conference center, hotel, US hotel block kind of vibe. So it's a much bigger kind of thing than I have done before, even bigger than RubyConf Mini.
Quick question: are you scared?
Oh yeah, terrified. Because I want to do a good job, right? Like, I know very much what Brighton Ruby is, and the people who've come year after year know what Brighton Ruby is. And last year was unusually big for Brighton Ruby, to the point where it started to get a little bit squashy in terms of just getting people in and out of the room. Like, it was 500 people, and normally it's like 300. So I don't think it'll be that big again. I think that was a post-COVID thing.
Okay.
But yeah, this is 1,000 people. This is going to be like 800, 1,000, 1,200 people. Like, I haven't looked at the keynote room and see how many it could hold, but we could happily fit the people in. Okay.
Well, the thing that I would be afraid of, like all of the unknowns, like, okay, like you said, like, what Brighton Ruby is, what the 300, 500 people, operation is, but doing it in the States. And this leads to my next question. Is this, so I don't know how to put this. Is this like a US versus Europe thing? Is this like, because like RailsConf, when you talk about that, like even RubyConf, like it's a US thing. To me, in my mind, it always was like that. It was always a US conference that you do it US style. Well, I don't know, big hotels, big venues, and everything. Is this like you bringing a little bit of Europe and how people do it?
I think so. Like, I think there's ways to take. I think at that scale, it's quite difficult to do anything but the conference center or big hotel version of a conference. Like, once you're beyond, I would, if I didn't have the venue I have at Brighton, I would struggle to get to the numbers I have. Like, and also the fact it moves around every year for in the US. So I think there's a certain amount of relearning every year.
Okay.
And the personnel of the board of Ruby Central has changed a lot as well over the last 5 or 6 years. So, even in the last couple of years, there's been another cycle through of people who've, they've put in their effort into the community, and then they've moved on because, it's a lot of work to do that stuff. So I think it's less a US thing, more a sort of circumstantial thing. And like, I think people presume that RailsConf was much more deliberate than it was. Like, I think in the early days, from what I understand, I wasn't in the community at this point. I was in Singapore, but like those big O'Reilly events were like a big thing.
Okay.
And then it sort of got a bit more community based.
Okay.
And then there were folks who ran it for quite a few years. And it was just, it's more straightforward, even though the costs are greater when you go into those hotels and those conference environments. You know, the food bill is huge, and the hotel rooms are, you know, the US hotel rooms, you know, in the big chain hotels, they sort of have to be.
Yep.
So it gets a bit, it does, you know, I'd like to think that I can inject a little bit of something else into it. A little bit of you know, Ufuk lives in Turkey as well. Like, it's the pair of us are doing this like at quite arm's length. So it's a good job. Like, the Ruby Central staff are there, and they're great, and you know, they're familiar with running this sort of event.
Yeah.
And they put together for last year. There's an actual events team now, and it's sort of a contractor that we can use to do stuff for us. So in the same way that I use the staff at the Dome in Brighton to kind of, I say, can I have, you know, I said to them one year, can I have 300 ice creams? And they were like, yeah. So that is a good thing as a conference organizer. I've got this good idea, and I have money that can make it happen. Can you make it happen? And they say yes. So I presume there's no way that I could undertake this if it was, if it was the same as Brighton.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like, this moving around the conference, is this a bug or a feature?
I would say it's a fug.
It's a bug. This is the first time that I'm hearing about this, but I'm going to remember it. I'm going to use it.
I think it makes sense to move it around so it doesn't become a one city deal, right?
Yeah.
East Coast, you know, America's quite a big country, like, apparently.
Of course.
So like East Coast, West Coast, quite a big deal. Like, you know, when there's a big Ruby Central conference on the West Coast, it's quite a flight from Europe. But like the East Coast stuff, like this year, like Detroit is not, although there's only one flight from the UK direct, it's not a terrible flight.
Yep.
And, you know, it's good to explore different American towns. Like, I went to New Orleans for RubyConf. That was amazing. That's such a good city.
Yes.
And you know, even LA has got a bad name, sort of, you know, for big roads and traffic. And but I went to that and I enjoyed LA as well. So like, there's loads of like good things about it.
Of course. I feel that this is a little bit, you're going into like a little bit of Yuruko territory, you know, where Yuruko is in Europe and it's organized in a different city by a different organizer.
I mean, that's bananas.
Exactly. And still, I see how, like, I haven't, like, my first Yuruko was last year in Vilnius, and I've been in touch with the guys there, with Ali and everybody. And I know their struggles, but at the end, it was such a great event, such a beautiful, and they have never put on that kind of event before. And now Muhammad is doing it in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, and he lined up like this big venue. It's amazing, whatever, I don't want to spoil it. But again, like you said, it's bananas. How come somebody that never put on a conference this big, like 500 people, 400, 500, 600 people, go on a stage, pitch their city, and, you know, people just vote on it, and okay, you got it. You have to organize a 600 people event.
Naivety is how.
Exactly.
And I think there's a certain element of like, I can do Brighton every year because there are parameters that don't change, and I can just improve things. Yeah. So like, you know, it's you know, it's like software. I'm refactoring the conference every year.
Yes, I agree.
And now I can kind of, and you know, you'll do the same for Friendly, right? Like, there's things that other people didn't notice, but you were just like, God damn it, that was terrible. I wish. Yes. Oh, I should have thought of that. And then it just goes into your endless lists of things to think about on the week before, right? So
for next year,
for next year
list. Yeah. Of course, I agree. I totally agree. You understand me? Yeah. So I think I'd be very scared if I were you, but I think it's in good hands. I think it's in good hands, and it'll be a good refresher.
Yeah, and the things we want to do differently are, you know, RubyConf this year had a sort of a coding day, a hack day at the beginning of it, a community day, and we're doing that for RailsConf. So this year it's going to be a day of talks. So there'll be keynote probably, and then the second day is going to be. We will have a keynote to make sure everyone gets out of bed, and then then it's going to be. I mean, the theme of this year is building with Rails. That's where we're coming from. It's like it's building with Rails and the people who build. With Rails. Yeah. So it's like it's learning from each other. There's opportunities to take existing things in the framework and work on them on that second day. There's things that are adjacent to the Rails framework, like, Rails, as is in the manifesto, Rails is a big tent. So like maybe the RSpec folks will be there and want to work on something in RSpec for Rails. Maybe there'll be stuff in some of the job frameworks that people want to work with. There may be actual Rails apps we want to build. Like, there are plenty of open source Rails apps that are out there that are doing good stuff. So why don't we work on some of those? What that exactly looks like, we're not totally sure, but we definitely want that second day to be deliberately code focused. And that's when we'll put the workshops on as well. Like, the workshops are always very popular at RailsConf. The more training-y, they're like 2 hours rather than, a half an hour, 40-minute talk.
Yeah.
And it's more exercise based. So we're going to stick those on the second day so that you can go to a workshop, maybe learn something in the morning, and then spend the afternoon trying to put it in your app. Or you're inspired by something on day one in one of those talks and you want to go and code on that or explore it in your app. So it's like that kind of creating a space for people to get hands on keyboards amongst their people.
Yes.
That's kind of the vibe of that second day that we really want to do. And then the third day will be talks again, and there'll be keynotes and
beautiful.
So and we're trying to narrow it down a bit, because like last year RailsConf got really big. Like, it was lots of speakers. So like we're trying to like focus it down so it's slightly less broad but much more practical. And hopefully the folks who go will come away with really useful stuff.
I think so. I've heard only good things about like the RubyConf coding day, workshopy day. Marco did quite a few things, fixed a few things with other people on different projects. So I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do at such a large conference. And it's like you said, you're coding with your people. It's totally different than doing pair programming online.
And we're going to set up an environment that lets you do that. I would imagine we're going to order an enormous number of like flip charts and post-it notes and fun stuff to make the sort of stuff. If you were, I don't like the term hackathon, because it's a bit like it sounds exhausting, but we don't like that word. So like a hack day is fine.
You should do a 1 hour hackathon or something, because you can build many things with Rails in 1 hour.
You could build 4 blogs. So like, as we know, because it only takes 15 minutes, right? So we're all good.
Of course. That's amazing. Tell us more about the CFP. What kind of talks are you waiting? Would you like to see any type of talks? What workshops? What's on that table?
Yeah, so I mean, both my CFPs are open right now. So the RailsConf CFP is open, as is the Brighton one. So like, I'm getting all the talks this month, and it's primarily I sort of want to see the same things. Like Brighton, I can be a bit. Brighton is a Ruby conference, so I can be a bit less Railsy. And we had Tim from Hanami come and do that amazing singing talk that he did, which is amazing. If you haven't seen on YouTube, you should definitely get it. It's probably linked up here. Check this out in my channel. I don't know. So I've got like a list of talks that I would like to be able to give, but I really think the thing that is often missing, like we hear a lot from the Shopify team that do so much great open source work for us, and you hear a lot from people with open source projects and stuff like that, and you hear a lot from the core members of the Rails core team and people who are building stuff into Rails, but I really think there's a gap for people who are building things in that sort of middle ground. So it's like things like how have you done caching at your work, right? Like in my experience, every team is terrible at caching. We have these really good caching facilities in Rails, and we're all really bad at using them. And we have, we all know that N+1s are bad. Yeah. And yet, what's the next thing after that? Like, what are the things, when you get to a certain scale, like, what do you then have to scale?
Yeah.
It's like, it's as you progress from like a team of 2, just like frantically getting features and trying to make a business happen.
Yeah.
When you get a team of 5, when you get a team of 10, like, what are the inflection points, and what are the growing pains and the things to avoid or the things to bear in mind when you're using an alternative framework? Yeah. So that, can you compare the places that you're hosting your app? Have you saved a bunch of money by not moving to your own hardware, but from moving from AWS to something else? Or
a service.
How does Heroku work versus Render versus Fly? Like, have you ever done the thing where we were on MySQL and we moved to Postgres, or we moved to SQLite, or how do you run a small team of Rails developers? What's really worked for you? So there's all sorts of like really interesting, like gritty, useful talks that people don't even know they have the knowledge about. And you don't even need to be an expert. You don't need to have done it 4 times. This has worked for us is a great talk, because this has worked for us. And then in researching that talk and building that talk, you can then go and find people and say, hey, you're a similar sized team to me. What works for you? We do this. And then you build that into a talk, right? And then the audience can really take something gritty and useful away from that, like practical takeaways. You're never going to, it's not training, right? It's a talk. It's inspiring. It's meant to make you go off and do other stuff and research yourself. But, the documentation talk from Brighton Ruby is a great, Caitlin's documentation talk is a really good example of this. Like, it made us all go, oh yeah. It brought on the guilt sufficient that some of us may have gone and started a wiki at work.
Exactly.
Pointing no fingers at anybody. So, it's those sorts of talks. It's those gritty, practical, mid-sized talks, because we're going to get talks from the Shopify team. And I'm not going to say there aren't going to be them. And, they absolutely should be part of the schedule, because they're doing really interesting stuff. Like, I really want to hear about the Rails LSP, right? Like, I want to hear about that stuff because that's useful for me. But, switching from device to like home rolled auth, can you do that? Is that feasible? Why would you do that? What things should you bear in mind? There's all sorts of like interesting stuff. And it's the stuff that you probably don't even think is interesting, but I really, really want to hear, because the more talks we've got, the more opportunities, the more voices, the more levels of talks we've got. I'm also interested in that intermediate and expert level stuff. And I mean from an app perspective, from a using Rails perspective, like, because there's so many introduction to X job framework. This is how you would use, and there's even some of that. You get that automatically from here's a new part of Rails. It's like, here's how you wire up an action cable, which is great. But like, you want to go the next level down. Like, and there were, I think of talks I saw at Rails World, like Vladimir's talk about action cable. And I was just like, I really enjoyed it, but I was just like, oh, I want to go a bit deeper into that bit, or a bit deeper into that bit. And I felt like it did give me another layer of understanding, but like, again, it was too much of an introduction talk. And what I want to get to is like those deeper talks which will really help people get value out of what is, frankly, it's not a cheap ticket, RailsConf. So I want people to get value out of it. I want people to go home to their teams and go, I learned these. I went to these 3 talks and they were amazing, and we should do this right now, because this will save us 10 grand a month, or this will save us 20 grand a month, or this will make our lives better. So that's what I want, right?
I can relate to that. It sounds a little bit like, okay, bring us your horror stories and how you fix them, or like, the best, the times that you made, improvements and whatever. And it reminds me a little bit about, like, we had Stephen Markheim, the SQLite guy. Maybe you know him. We had him on a show, and we asked him, like, how did you get to be the SQLite guy? How did you, And he said, like, okay, I was doing some R&D in my company, and I was trying out these apps. I was spinning apps very, very quick, and I was trying out SQLite, and I've hit some rough edges, and then I started investigating, and one thing led to another, and I started PRing Rails for, fixes and fixing those rough edges, and I'm here. And again, I'm sure that everybody has this kind of story. They went into this R&D mode, or they went into, deeper rabbit holes, and, they can extract some information out of that. So
how did you become the conference guy?
It's
just like, well, I wanted this to happen, so I made it happen.
Exactly.
And then I kept doing it. And that's literally the story. Like, it's no more interesting than I am a bloody-minded fool who doesn't value his spare time, which is true of open source software as well as event organization.
Yep, I agree. Well, let's go a little bit, like, tell us about your speaking career, because this is how, like, I knew about Brighton, but I think I remember seeing you as a speaker at some conferences. Like, what kind of, like, speaker, like, I had this idea, to ask you this question, like, what kind of speaker are you, and what kind of conferences would you like to speak at? It's like the reverse CFP. Like,
reverse CFP.
I mean,
my talks have been quite varied. Like, I've done a couple of technical talks quite early on. It's just like getting the hang of standing up in front of a room full of people. And then more recently, the last 2 or 3 talks that I've done have been a mixture of Rails stuff or Ruby stuff and people things. And some of them have lent quite sort of, here's what I think, and you should think the same kind of talks from a stage. The one I did last year or the year before about was it last year? Yeah, last year about I think the one you saw at Rails SAS. The talk about Taylorism and how we rebuilt our Rails app, and how that some of it was technical and some of it was human. So yeah, that's the kind of, that's where my talks kind of fit. I do quite like what I consider, there's a conference series called Lead Developer.
Okay.
Have them in London and New York. And it's a conference idea I really wish I'd come up with, because it's just like everyone wants to be a lead developer. I bet they sell tickets to that really easily. And they're not limited to a particular language either. So like it's nice broad audience, and they get some really good speakers. So like some speakers from our community, like Nick Means, or I think Saron has spoken at Saron Barek has spoken at some of their events. And I'd love to speak there. For whatever reason, I keep bouncing off their CFP. I don't know what to do about that. But yeah, like my talks are a demonstration of my Keynote excellence. Like I'm much better in Keynote than I am in VS Code.
I noticed that. That's beautiful.
And I love to, like, I like to bring a little bit of the fact that I don't take things too seriously. Like I take things seriously, but I'm not weighed down by the seriousness of things. And so I like to bring that to my talk, and just try and be as human as possible, because like you said, like bring your horror stories. I'm like, yes, absolutely, because we're all human beings and we all make mistakes, and we're developers, and so we make lots of mistakes. I mean, you wouldn't let us build bridges, right? Like we're the engineers you can't trust with physical stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, I like the feedback that you get. I enjoy these days. I enjoy the feeling of standing on a stage as well. Like, and I MC Brighton Ruby, and that has prepared me for everything possible that could go wrong in your own talk. Could go wrong. So yeah, I've spoken several times. I was fortunate to be pulled out of the CFP to keynote RubyConf in 2017 in New Orleans, and I really enjoyed that talk. I made a bunch of Americans cry. It was good. That was the year where there was like a weird theme. Like, so me and Chad Fowler and a couple of other people, a lot of the keynotes had some form of death in them. So it was like, so like I talk about death in that talk as well. So it's like, retro video gaming and death is in that talk. So it's a really fun talk, and I'd love to give that one again, because I don't think that one is particularly aged badly. So
you should end that talk with like, this is how we do it in Europe. We mean business.
we mean business. We're going to bring you down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How about like happier things, or tell me if they're happier? Tell me about First Ruby Friend, and tell people what it is. I know what it is. I think I'm sure that most people know, but give it.
I'm not sure most people do know. So again,
you give it the definition that you think it is now after all this time, because I'm sure it kind of changed a little bit.
Maybe kind of, yeah. I mean, it's basically I got annoyed. So as with so many good pieces of software and things in the world, something annoyed me. So I built a website, which is how I process my trauma. And I was annoyed with how bad we are at hiring junior developers. And I don't think this is specifically a Ruby thing or a Rails thing. I think this is it's too easy to be lazy.
Yeah,
it's an industry. I think it's everywhere. Like I was chatting to someone who runs a PR agency, and they were like, they were like, oh, we need to find some SEOs. And I was like, well, and they were like, oh, they're really expensive and they're hard to find. I was like, well, why don't you hire someone junior and train them? And they're like, oh, that seems like hard work.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it is. But then you end up with someone who's perfect for your business.
Yep.
And maybe a bit grateful, and
exactly
you've given opportunity, and you haven't pulled the ladder up behind you. You've put the ladder down, and you've helped someone up. And so that's what First Ruby Friend was. And knowing that Rubyists are generally a friendly bunch, and sort of some of the open source ethos of giving time to others without expectation. I decided to see if I could weaponize the friendliness of the Ruby community into giving a load of people in the first year of their career, either pre or post first job, just someone to talk to, because I know that there's a lot of appetite in teams that maybe aren't growing or teams that were facing cutbacks or whatever. Like they wanted to mentor junior people, but they didn't feel like work supported that. So it's an opportunity for the mentors as well to do that. Like, you don't really know something until you teach it. So I think it was that, and it is just a website with a couple of hosted forms and a spreadsheet. And then once a month I go through and I match people. And it's a lot smaller than it was at the beginning because I haven't pushed it that hard this year, but I'm still matching, somewhere between 20-ish, so about 20-ish people, 20-ish pairs a month of mentors with mentees.
That's great.
And I am at some point going to systemize that. I'm thinking maybe my hack day project at RailsConf will be, can I finish off the first Ruby Friend Rails app so that I don't have to manually do this once a month? Because when it doesn't, once a month doesn't sound right very much, but when it rolls around, I'm like, oh man, I've got to find 2 hours in my weekend to do this, or 3 hours, or back in when the first flush of it, like a lot more than that. So like it's quite a manual process, and I'd like to demanualize it. But nice. I just haven't. It's fine. I keep volunteering for stuff, so it's like, it's tricky to find time.
Yeah. So for first Ruby Friend, what do you need? Reach out and this is a what do you call, call to action. Like I need these people. Like I'm sure I can get like I get beginners, juniors, but I need these kind of people to match up with the juniors or something.
I mean, I still run a surfeit of mentors. So actually the having enough mentors is fine, particularly in the US, UK, where obviously English speaking, people have heard from me, like, and Europe as well. Like I've got wildly more mentors in places, in Eastern Europe and Germany and, France and Spain and Italy. So there's wildly more. It's a bit more difficult to reach out into the wider world where there maybe isn't a large group of centralized Rubyists, or there isn't a thing to hang people around. Like, so I when RubyConf India was happening, I pinged them and was like, hey, RubyConf India, I know that there's hundreds of you in a room. Can some of you sign up? Because I get applicants from India all the time. So,
okay.
It's a case of like reaching out, and, I'd like to do internationalization. I'd like to provide better matching for those folks. And I've teamed up with the Women in Non-Binary Rubyists group, and they're going to try and push mentors and mentees into this system as well. So
nice. Like, and going back a little bit around the geography, where have you noticed any like we all know, like in the US, Rails is big, Ruby is pretty big. Have you found any other geographic places, areas where you saw like, hey, there are a lot of people that are trying Ruby or that would like to be Rubyists?
I think there's Brazil's quite big. Germany. There's lots of mentors from Germany. I mean, if you went to Eureka, that too, right? Like it's like 50% German. And then it gets a bit of a smattering. Like I really feel like there's loads of Rubyists that I've seen at conferences, and yet there must be at least 10 times as many who don't come to conferences, who won't see this video, who won't. Where is this like Ruby community dark matter? I want to find it.
Where do you hang out?
Yeah, where are you hanging? Are you just going home? And that's completely fine. Like, programming as a day job is totally fine. But like, it's that thing of, can we reach them? Can we help them? Can we use them? And then can we find their companies and encourage them to bring on juniors, right? Like, because that's the thing is, Ruby's such a great teaching language, and we have these boot camps all over the place. I don't even know, like, that's the other thing that I will do once it's a bit more automated, is that I will go and find the boot camps, and I will hit the boot camps every 2 months. And I do this in London. There's a Lewagan boot camp in London where I've hired 3 people from, and I go and give a talk at the end of each of their cycles. So just go and talk to them about what it is to be a professional programmer. And I just go and talk to them, tell them what it's like, and explain to them this first year is hard. Like finding your first job after a boot camp is really hard. But they've done something really hard, and there's only like, they've done 80% of the work, and they've just got the next 90% to go, right? Like once you've got that first job, then you're totally done, because then you can sell yourself as a mid-level developer and everyone's going to hire you. But that first one, unless a company is willing to take a inverted commas chance, and it's not a chance. I've hired 3 people in the last 18 months, and they're all amazing. So I'm just like, hire juniors. They're way cheaper than seniors, and they are so effective and happy, and just generally a really good time in your team.
And generally, they want to get shit done. They want to do things right.
They're like sponges. They're so spongy. Their brains are so. It's like having children around. Their brains are so spongy.
So I think this is something that you kind of figure out when, like, you know there's something that you don't want to be done on the team, and you talk to a junior and say, yeah, we have to do this, but nobody wants to do it, and they come, I want to do it, like, I want to build it, give it to me. And that's like, oh my god, this person is not bored by everything. It's not like
they're not jaded like me.
exactly. So there are plenty of advantages. Well, tell me, Andy, where can people find you? And why should they write to you? Why should they bother you and ask for things? Because you cannot say no, so you will help.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Can you come and help me move? I've got a wardrobe that needs moving. Can you bring a car over? I am Andy Croll pretty much everywhere. AndyCroll. Ruby Social. I cross post to Twitter, X, and andycroll.com. Like if you Google certain Ruby problems, my website will come up, because I've been writing every couple of weeks a very simple piece of Ruby code and sending it out to an email list. So I'm on there, and like what would really help me right now is if you worked out what you wanted to talk about and submitted your talks to the RailsConf CFP or the Brighton Ruby CFP, and give me that headache of extra work to do of going through all your talks. Like I'm genuinely I want to make RailsConf super fun, super awesome, and keep up with Brighton Ruby and keep that super fun too. So buy a ticket, submit to the CFP, come and meet other Rubyists, and it's genuinely worth it. Like I need to write down why conferences are important to me and why I think they should be important to everyone. So come and see other Rubyists, and go to Friendly RB as well. Like I would recommend that conference. I hear the guy who runs it, super cool guy.
I hear that too. Cool, Andy. Thank you so much. That was beautiful and hopefully inspiring for everyone. Thank you. And I'll see you on the channels and in this year's events.
Excellent. Lovely to speak to you, Adrian. Cheers, man. Bye.
Yep.